I'll see it on my screen. Okay, great. Hi, everybody, to another humanity series. Humanity series could go on forever. We decided to do 5. It's just a random number that I chose. We could go on for, there's so many directions you can talk about humanity. Today, it is definitely an interesting discussion, a very important one, a very controversial one, depending in which circles you are, which religion you are. Next week, I'll try go even more controversial, not because I like being controversial, just because I like exposing people to different ideas, and we'll see where that goes. Today, most of the lecture is based on one of my teacher's lectures from New York City, Rabbi Chaim Angel. What an amazing Bible scholar. He knows the Tanakh very, very well. I'm going to be quoting a lot of the Tanakh. I'm not quoting many sources, only because it's not necessary to quote many sources when you're talking about arguments between people. I just want to expose the view, but there are obviously many sources that you could bring to either side of the equation. And let's begin. Okay, in part 1 of the Humanity series, we spoke about Tselem Elokim. What does it mean to be created in the image of God? And we went through different versions in our tradition of what makes us into godlike, so to speak. And that showed pretty much that all humans have some type of infinite potential within us. In part 2, we went on to the human's innate desire for spirituality. I would say it's not even a desire, it's who we are. We are spiritual beings, thus we always, since time immemorial, but definitely from the beginning of the Torah, with Cain offering sacrifices, even though we've never heard of such a thing as a sacrifice, etc., he somehow knows to offer it. It seems that human beings naturally are striving to be spiritual, as well as how did Cain know that he wasn't meant to murder if there was no such law as not murdering? Therefore, we suggested that all human beings have an innate morality within them, and that shows, again, humanity has potential because it is deep down within us, regardless of our education or hundreds of years of education or miseducation. Now we'll talk about the concept of chosen-ness. Firstly, dedicating it to all Holocaust survivors. Today is the United Nations Holocaust Day. Israel celebrates Yom HaShoah later in the year, but obviously many of us here knew people who either died in the Holocaust or were very close family to people who died in the Holocaust. It's so sad when I speak to young kids today who don't have a clue or know very little about the Holocaust. And that's just, time flies and things get forgotten. But we will be remembering all of those victims and heroes today while we are learning. Starting off with a little story. So this is a true story. And I'm going to leave this story as a question, which we'll come back to right at the end. And you'll tell me if there's any truth in this story based on the sources that I'm going to give you. So the year is about 10 years ago or so. And I am not married, and I am camping on the beach in Malibu, which is an area of Los Angeles, with some religious friends of mine for the weekend. So the way that it works in America, you hire out a campsite. It's on the beach, it's in Malibu, famous Malibu, and we are there for the weekend. Next to us, there is a family, it's a Mexican family, Spanish speaking, only Spanish speaking, they don't speak English, but we come 3 or 4 of us, they come 50 of them for a weekend. Cousins, grandparents, great uncles, cousins, close to 50 of them. So, there's 4 of us and there's 50 of them. What do you do if you're a religious person and you want a religious Jew and you want to carry on Shabbat? It has to be a private domain. A beach is not a private domain. So one of my friends is a carpenter, and he brings all these wooden poles, about 20 of them, and he sticks them all over our campsites. It's massive. I'd say maybe 20 meters by 10 meters, huge areas that we could carry in. We could carry our pots and pans and whatever else we're cooking with on Shabbat is going to be using. And the Spanish family next to us from Mexico are just watching these people do their thing. Then one of my friends decides he wants to put on tefillin before Shabbat. So he starts putting on these black leather straps, and you have 50 eyes from the next door campsite just looking at what are these people doing. They started off by putting poles all over the place. Then they started putting leather straps over their arms. They're just looking at us going, what are they doing? So needless to say, that particular Shabbat, we did not have anything to do with that Spanish family next to us. And it wasn't based on us not having to do. I think the parents told their children, don't go near those freaks. Do not even go near those people. So, we didn't have anything to do. But at the end of Shabbat, they called us over. They were having a bonfire. So they called us over and they started chatting. Now, unfortunately, at that stage, I could not speak any Spanish. There were only 3 of the 50 who spoke English. So what happened was my one friend divided and he spoke to 15 of them. My other friend divided and he spoke to 15 of them. And I was left with a group of about 15, Spanish speakers, all from Mexico, all family members, who were asking me questions. And we started talking, and I was talking to the one person who could speak English. And then when I spoke, he translated it to the other 14 people, and they all said, oh, wow, oh, yes, etc., etc. Now, I remember 2 things about that discussion. One thing about that discussion was they asked if we would drink tequila, homemade tequila. So we said, yeah, we'll have a shot of homemade tequila with you. So the one man who can speak English, he comes to me and he says, you know what, I don't drink tequila. So I said, no, I don't know why you don't drink tequila. He says, because it's very embarrassing in Mexico if your wife can drink more tequila than you. So his wife was just drinking tequila after tequila after tequila, trying to get me to drink. I had a taste of wine. I'm not the biggest tequila person. That was the one thing I remember. The second thing I remember is that the husband asked me in front of the 14 others, what's this on your head? So I said, it's a yarmulke. So he said, you're Jewish? So I said, yes, I am. He said, are all Jewish people blessed? That was his question. So I looked at him, and again, just bear in mind that he has translated the question to 14 people who are now looking at me for a response. So I said to him, I'll tell you my answer, but you have to promise me, because you asked me the question, that you can't be upset with me whatever I answer. I'm just going to tell you what I think, but you have to be able to handle the answer. So he explained that to everybody. Now everybody's at the edge of their seats. What is this person, this crazy person from next door with the wooden poles and the leather straps? What is he going to say? So my answer to him and to the 14 people, I said, yes, I do believe the Jewish people have a unique blessing, but every nation has a blessing. That was my answer. And immediately he said to me, we knew it, because all of you are rich and all of you are blessed and all of you are famous and etc., etc. And he gave the whole stereotype of what a Jewish people is, because he had only met in his life people who were rich, who were Jews. Those were the only few people that he had met who were Jewish, and they were all rich. So he assumed that all Jewish people have this blessing beyond everybody else. And it wasn't me telling him that that Jews have a blessing. He was telling me. Now, is there truth to that story? A, that the Jews have a unique blessing, and B, that all nations are blessed. You'll be able to answer however you think, just naturally, but I hope that some of the sources I'm about to bring might shed some light on, is there any truth to that story of mine? Let's start off with Maimonides. This is called the one family principle. So if you notice, there is no nations or countries at the beginning of the Torah. All we're told of is that there's Adam and Eve, and they have children, and those people have children, etc., etc., etc. It's one happy, big, growing family. Now, is this by coincidence that the Torah starts off like this? Is this an important detail? Did the Torah need to make it clearer than the fact that there was only one family? Did it need to go out its way and to say, there was a reason why the Torah started off with one family? Maimonides assumes no, it's blatantly obvious to Maimonides that there is a reason why the Torah starts off with one family. That's obviously to tell you that we are, as humanity, one family. That is the first point of departure. How a Jew should think that we not just are all Tselem Elokim, in the image of God, because there could be many things in the image of God which are not related. No, you're all created in the image of God as a part from one individual, or let's say from two individuals, Adam and Eve. You all have the same DNA, so you're biologically related. Not only that, but you are all meant to live as a family. You know, families love each other. You got to accept each other, however different individuals are, etc., etc., etc. Not only that, but it's an important fact because at the time that the Torah was given, all the other ancient Near East religions didn't have the same story as Moses' Torah did. Their story, like the Babylonians and the Egyptians, was that there were many gods, and this God created that nation, and our God created us, and that God created that nation, and our God is the greatest, so therefore our God created us because we are the greatest. That's what was going around at the time of 1300 BCE. Comes along the Jewish people's Torah, and it all of a sudden says, no. There's one God. We're all from one family. That is a massive chidush, a massive innovative thought that Moses brought to the world that was surrounding him at the time, that people don't think about, but that's why it was so important to start off with one God, one family. No one is more important than the next. So, and then last but not least, that leads itself to the idea that prejudice should not exist. I mean, we're all from one family. Even though we might look different, I mean, I've got two children. My one child's much darker skin than the other, but they're both from me. Likewise, we could all end up looking different, but we all are the same DNA. So Maimonides' first principle of one family, that's a massive principle that the whole of the Torah is based on right from the beginning of the Torah, chapter 1. Okay, next, the Talmud takes it one step further and says, it's by the fact, it doesn't say why we were created as one person, the same way that Rambam does, Maimonides. But the Talmud says in Sanhedrin, we learn from the fact that Adam was created on his own, that if you kill one person, you destroy a whole world. And likewise, if you save one person, you save a whole world, assuming that the world was created for Adam. Therefore, it's that important. Each individual is that important that it's like destroying a whole world. If you do something bad to a human, whereas you do something good, it's like saving a whole world. So you can see from both the Torah itself, as well as from the Talmud, there is this idea of seeing the relevance and significance of every human being, especially based on the fact that we all come from the same person. Okay, now let's get to a little bit more controversy. What about the divisions that we see in humanity? Where does this come from? So Genesis chapter 11 speaks about the famous Tower of Babylon. We know that today there is an app on the iPhone and the Android called Babel, and it's to teach you different languages. Why did the app decide to call itself Babel, which means Babylon in Hebrew? Because the beginning of the Torah, chapter 11, talks about how at some point in history, all humanity was talking the same language. We had one common purpose, seemingly no different countries. We did something negative, whatever it was, and that resulted in all human beings going on their own merry way, developing their own languages and their own countries, and becoming culturally different. So that seemingly suggests, A, that it's not a good thing that we are all different and have different languages. That was a curse that God put on this earth to say, you can't use you're using your unity to fight me, you're using your unity to revolt. I need to spread you out somehow, weaken you, so that you can't use your unity and strength against me. So there we see again that diversity seemingly is not the best thing. It might even be a curse. So that's from the Torah itself. The Sforno, a 16th century Italian rabbi, in his introduction to the book of Genesis, introduces something which our Chaim Angel calls the three strikes and you are out principle. That means just like in baseball, you have 3 attempts to hit the ball. And if you don't, sorry, it's time to walk away. You've lost. Likewise, humanity had 3 opportunities to try and redeem itself after its mistakes. It started off with Adam and Eve, and we know that they made a mistake, strike 1, and they ate from the forbidden fruit. God said, okay, humanity, I still have faith in you, all of you, and I'm going to give you another chance. Thus, 10 generations from Adam came to the time of Noah and the deluge. And again, humanity was given a chance, and it started killing each other. So God sent this whole flood, that's strike 2. One more chance and you're out. What was the third chance? The Tower of Babylon. Again, they used their unity to fight. This is all Sforno, the 16th century. So therefore, the Sforno says, 3 strikes and you're out. It's now time for God to change his strategy. No more will God give every individual an opportunity to be considered chosen, like the way it was meant to be from the beginning of time, because 3 strikes and you're out. That didn't work. From now on, God changes his strategy, and now we'll use pawns, or I will say role models, as another way of saying all humanity can't get their stuff together, but instead of all humanity, let me get certain groups to get their dynamics and morality in shape, and they will be the educators and the influencers for everybody else. And that's what the Sforno says is how nations came to be, like the Jewish people and others, is because they were chosen out of the masses as those role models or teachers or educators to try and help everybody else out. So that is the second source, the Sforno. Again, just to finish off that, once again, we see that according to the Sforno and according to the literal version of the Tower of Babylon, it didn't seem that multicultural and multi-country, multinational, and all those things are virtues. It seems that those were only practical means of trying to facilitate world morality, but it was meant to happen on its own by everybody. Just a little thought that I had about Sforno and what he's saying is this part of human nature, that even though that we all know that we come from the same human or the same family, but the more branches you go and the less attached that you are to those people before you, you just stop realizing the relations, and you just start loving the people who are close to you, and you start fearing the people who are far from you, even though deep down you know that you all come from the same place. I'm not exactly sure what lends human beings to feel distance from each other, but it seems obvious that we're all closer to the people in our lives than we are to people who are further away from us. Okay, so that's the second thing, is where does differentiation come from? It doesn't seem like it's an ideal, but it seems that it was a method to bring about a destiny for humanity. Next, C, chosen-ness of the Jewish people. So far we've discussed the one family principle. We've also discussed the 3 strikes and you're out principle. And now we're coming on to not just chosen-ness as a concept, but chosenness for the Jewish people. So number one, if you had to go and ask people how many children did Abraham have, most people who haven't read the Bible multiple times will tell you that Abraham had two children. He had Ishmael with Hagar and had with Sarah Isaac. There is another woman in the Torah mentioned. Her name is Keturah, and Abraham has 6 children with Keturah. So all in all, Abraham has 8 children. Out of the 8, we know that 2 in the Torah are chosen, Yishmael and Yitzchak. So it's not even that it's by descent. It seems that Abraham only had 25% of his children being considered chosen, and 75% of them were regular humans, but they were not chosen. So where does this chosenness come from? It's obviously not DNA, because only 25% of Abraham's children were chosen. Where does it come from? Where did it come from in Abraham himself? The Torah mentions nothing about Abraham's virtues of why he was chosen to go to Israel. All it says, Abraham comes to the picture and he's told to go to the land that I will show you. But it doesn't say why he was chosen. This is a massive debate in Judaism amongst our medieval commentaries of why this is so. Why was Abraham chosen in the first place? And the way you understand this debate will vastly change the way you see your Judaism. So you can choose which one you want, but these are 2 points that have been mentioned by famous rabbis. Let's start off with the more politically correct one, which is the Rambam and the Ramban. They assume that they fill in the blank, and they say that although Abraham doesn't have any details about his life before he was chosen, it must be that he was righteous. Why would God choose someone who is not righteous to be the father of many religions? He must have been one of the most amazing human beings ever to walk the earth, and therefore he was chosen. It's almost like it's obvious. That is the Rambam and the Ramban. Let's call it option A. Option B, the Maharal, he argues. And he says, no, obviously Abraham was a righteous person. He might have been righteous before. Maybe he only became righteous once he went to Israel. We don't know when he became righteous. But it's not that he was chosen because he's righteous. That is not true. Like the first opinion says, Abraham was chosen because he was a righteous man. That's what deserved his chosenness. The Maharal says, no, he was chosen, only God knows why he was chosen, but it had nothing to do with him being righteous. Now, why would that opinion be so strong and anti being chosen because you're a good person? I mean, I understand that logic. Yes, I like people who are nice, good people. I don't like people who are rude as much as I like the people who are nice and have manners. So I choose the people who are nicer and nice. Why would God be any different? So the Maharal is bothered by a very important question. If you assume that our chosenness comes from being righteous, then what happens when you're not righteous? What happens when your children are not righteous? What happens when your generation after generation of generation are not walking in the ways that you once walked? Does that mean that God forsakes all those other people? Does that mean that chosenness is very temporary and only lasts while contingent on what people's behavior is? But after that behavior changes, the chosenness is not eternal. So that is what was bothering the second opinion, and that's why he wanted to say that Abraham was chosen irrespective of being a good person or not. It has nothing to do with him being a holy, righteous person. Let's go through with some proofs or disproofs of trying to understand when Jewish people claim that they are chosen from the Torah. Is this an eternal chosenness, or is this contingent on us behaving in some type of moral way? So let's bring some proofs to the pudding. Okay, number one. Genesis chapter 17, verse 7. So this has got to do with Abraham. And I will establish my covenant between me and your kids after you for an everlasting covenant. This is what God says to Abraham. I will establish my covenant between me and your kids after you for an eternal covenant. That seems to be pretty thorough, like the Maharal. It's not contingent on anything. You're blessed even when your children and your grandchildren and all those people are misbehaving and becoming drunkens and gambling, addicted to gambling or internet or pornography or politics or this or that, whatever they do, it doesn't matter. You're always chosen in my covenant. That's one point for the Maharal. Let's bring a point for the Rambam and the Ramban. Exodus chapter 19, verse 5. And again, I could bring many proofs for both. I'm just bringing one each, just so that you can get an idea. This is when the Torah is given in Parshat Yitro. If you obey my voice and keep my commandment, then you shall be a treasured nation unto me from all the peoples. Keyword, if. That's how the sentence starts. If you shall hearken my voice and keep my commandments. That sort of implies that if you don't keep my commandments, you're no more chosen. So 1 point each so far. Which way is it? Are the Jewish people, according to the Torah, according to the text of the Torah and the Tanakh, is it an eternal chosenness or is it contingent? That's what we're trying to figure out here. So those are two Torah proofs. And now let's go to the Tanakh, what we call the Bible, the Old Testament. So this is from the prophet Hosea, chapter 1, verse 9. I think Hosea lived approximately 700, 800 BCE. So in chapter 1, it says that Hosea is told to marry Eshet Nunim. How you translate that, I don't know, but my Tanakh over there says it's a prostitute. Okay, so this Hosea is told to marry this prostitute called Eshet Nunim. And here's the verse, Vayomer, Karashmo lo ami, ki atem lo ami, v'anochi lo yeh lachem. Call his name. This is God saying to Hosea the prophet, call his name, lo ami, you are not my nation. Ki atem, because you are no longer my nation, and I will not be with you anymore. That's God telling Hosea the prophet, the Jewish people before the destruction of the first temple have sinned. They are no longer my nation. So much are they not my nation that you, Hosea the prophet, should call your child Lo Ami, you are not from my nation. So that's seemingly a proof, like the Maharal, that yes, it's contingent on being good people and more moral. And if you're not acting that way, therefore you no longer have that chosenness anymore. But I can bring you other proofs in the other direction. This is from the book of Isaiah, chapter 50, verse 1. Thus says God, where is your bill of your mother's divorce? Where is the get that says that you Jewish people have left this marriage partnership with me, God? Where is it? There is no get. Isaiah is saying there is no bill of divorce because you cannot divorce me. There is no such thing. There's no such thing as the Jewish people being divorced from God. That's what Isaiah is saying in chapter 50. So here we've got one prophet saying, call my son, you're no longer my nation. And we've got another prophet saying, there's no such thing as a divorce. Rabbi Chaim Angel ends up by saying, when he knows, lots of scripture, so he could bring lots of sources, but I just brought you one of each. But he ends up saying, both are true. Both the Maharal saying that it's not contingent, and Maimonides and the Ramban is saying it's contingent. Both are true, because yes, it's true from the scripture that God cannot divorce the Jewish people. That is true, but at the same time, it's also true that God can separate from the Jewish people. So, when it comes to two human beings leaving each other, you've got those two options. You've got divorce and you've got separation. So, yes, divorce cannot happen, but yes, separation can happen. So that just shows you, how you view the Jewish people in lines of the ancient, the ancient masters, the Maharal, the Rambam, and the Ramban. Is there such a thing as eternal chosenness, irrespective, no matter what? Or is it contingent on our actions? That is a big debate. Two more little sections to discuss. What about chosenness of the other nations? Non-Jewish people, can they be chosen by God as well? So again, I'm going to quote you some verses where there's a little bit of a discrepancy how to understand this, but I'll definitely give you over the majority opinion of understanding this. Isaiah chapter 19, verse 25. In that day shall, that part's not important, but God says, whom God shall bless, saying, Baruch Ami Mitzrayim, blessed be Egypt, my people, and Assyria, the work of my hands, and Israel, my inheritance. Now, I don't know if this is true. I can't remember the exact lecture, but I think Rabbi Angel said this is the only time in the whole of the Bible that it mentions a non-Jewish nation being called by God, Ami, you are my nation. And it mentions that the Egyptians are called Ami, my nation. And this is God speaking. Now, the Septuagint, which is the first translation of the Torah into Greek, they misconstrue, and I don't want to say misconstrue because Rashi does the same, but this is the minority opinion. They add in a letter into this verse. And they say, where it says, blessed are you, my nation, Egypt, they add the word Baruch Ami B'Mitzrayim, the letter B. Blessed is my nation in Egypt. So Rashi in the Septuagint wanted to say that this verse is saying that Jews in Egypt and Assyria will be blessed. But the majority opinion of commentaries, the Ibn Ezra, the Radak, and others, they assume the verse is the way that it says it in our Tanakh, where God is saying to Egypt, blessed is Egypt, my nation. So that is an indication that other nations can also be chosen by God. That's source number one. Source number two, the prophet Zephaniah, chapter 3, verse 9. For then I will turn to the people a pure language that they may call to God. From beyond the rivers of Ethiopia shall they bring my offering. Now, where it says, I will turn the people to a pure language. So again, the minority of opinions assume that this is saying that in the future, all nations will speak Hebrew. Okay, Hebrew is the pure nation and everyone will speak one language in the future. But once again, the majority of opinions of the rabbis through the whole of the medieval times, they say this is saying that in the future, many nations will come to be considered God's nation to serve God. So those are two verses in the Tanakh that show that other nations can be chosen as well. Lastly, what is the relationship between Jews to non-Jews? So far we've spoken about the one family principle. That was the ideal. Even before there were religions, we were all meant to be one family. That was the ideal. The ideal was without religions. Then we came on to the three strikes and you're out principle, which was the Seforno, saying that no, yes, we were all meant to be one family, but it just didn't work that way. God tried too many times, it didn't work. So from then on, there would be role models chosen to influence everybody else. Then we spoke about the chosenness of the Jews. Is it contingent on our actions or is it not? That was a big argument between the Maharal and the Rambam. And lastly, we just spoke about the chosenness of other nations, seemingly that the Tanakh says, yes, other nations can become chosen by God as well. Lastly, what is the relationship between Jews to non-Jews? So there are a few verses here from the Torah that mention things that are relevant. One is in Exodus chapter 4, verse 22. It says, tell Pharaoh, that the Jewish people are my firstborn son. God's not saying that there can't be other children, but that Jews are the firstborn. Likewise, in chapter 54 of Isaiah, it mentions that Israel is God's first spouse. It doesn't mean that there won't be other spouses in the future, but we were the first. It seems, and lastly, I'll mention one last source, This is the Sephorno who says it very clearly. He says it in an analogy. He says, a non-Jew to the Jew, or let me say it in another way. A Jew to a non-Jew is like a Kohen to a Jew. What does that mean? Just like the Kohen is a civil servant that is there. It's a priest. It's an educator to make sure that the spiritual needs of the rest of his people are taken care of. Likewise, the Jew is that civil servant to the non-Jew. So that's seemingly the Sephorno saying that, yes, all nations that walk in the lines of morality are considered chosen. And when people choose God, that is when they're chosen. When they choose God, that is when they're chosen. And once they do choose God, then God chooses who is going to be their civil servant. When the Jewish people chose God, God said, okay, here's the Kohen. When the non-Jewish people chose God, okay, that's when Abraham came into the picture. So that's just a little bit of a synopsis of the question of chosenness. So getting back to my original question, when I said to that person, that Mexican person in Malibu, when he asked me, are the Jewish people blessed? And I answered, yes, I do believe that they are, but I believe that every nation has their blessing. Was there truth in that statement? Well, I obviously think that there is truth in that statement. Definitely, it seems from the Tanakh itself that other nations can be chosen. Jewish people can be chosen if they live up to the morality that's demanded of them, according to the Rambam or according to the Maral. Regardless, no matter what we act, it's not contingent on our actions. And can other nations be chosen? Yes, they can, as long as they adopt to choose God as well. So it's not exactly the way that we picture chosenness to be, that one person is better than the other. And those are some sources. Now, next week, I might bring over the Kabbalah and non-biblical sources, where the biblical sources very much seem to suggest this idea of one family and that chosenness can be spread around the world. But the Kabbalah and others, they are a little bit more elitist. And we'll try to bring over why some people like that elitist view and why some people reject that view. And that's more modern thinkers and how to think of chosenness from modern thinkers. But today's sources were all from the Torah and the Tanakh, which to me are the most clear indication of what we're meant to think of humanity with regards to chosenness, if there is such a thing in the first place. Thank you all for being here. That is part 3 of 5. Next week, hopefully, we'll go into some of the more modern thinkers with regards to chosenness, and then we'll continue after that with a general idea of humanity. Thanks again. Thanks, Paul, for recording. Bye-bye.